A kind nurse comforts a dying patient, not knowing he's a wealthy man who will leave her a fortune. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more emotional and dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. In a quiet hospital room illuminated by soft, pale light, Nurse Claire Bennett adjusted the blanket of the elderly man lying silently in the bed. His breathing was slow, fragile, almost fading into the rhythmic hum of the machines surrounding him. Claire glanced at the chart clipped to the foot of the bed, then at the man's face, lined with age and exhaustion. His name was Richard Hale, admitted 3 nights ago with severe complications. No family had visited. No friends had called. His emergency contact information was blank. To everyone else, he was just another patient fighting a battle his body no longer had the strength to win. But to Claire, he had quickly become something more, a reminder of why she chose this profession in the first place. She was used to long shifts and emotional exhaustion, but something about Richard's quiet loneliness pulled at her in a way she could not quite explain. Earlier that afternoon, she had caught him struggling to whisper something, but the words never reached his lips. She gently squeezed his hand, whispering, "You are not alone tonight. I promise." And now, as she stood by the bedside, she noticed again the slight tremble in his fingers, as if he heard her presence even when unconscious. She leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her voice soft but firm, the kind of tone reserved for moments when compassion mattered more than medication. "Richard, if you can hear me, just know I am here." Outside the room, voices echoed down the hallway. Doctors discussing test results, a family crying quietly near the elevators, the world continuing in its chaotic rhythm. But inside this small room, everything felt suspended, as if time had slowed to allow a moment of stillness, a moment of dignity. Claire checked his foreline again, smoothing the tape with her thumb. She worked with a calm, practiced grace, but inside, her thoughts drifted. She wondered who he had been before illness stole his strength. A father? A businessman? Someone who once laughed loudly? Someone who once loved deeply? She wished he had someone who would walk into the room and hold his hand. But no one came. As she reached for the bedside lamp to dim the harsh overhead light, she felt a presence behind her. Turning around, she saw 2 elegantly dressed strangers standing in the doorway, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and a younger man in a tailored suit, holding a red leather folder. Their expressions were tense, urgent, as if arriving for a matter of great importance. Claire straightened instinctively, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The woman stepped forward first, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "Is he still alive?" she asked, her tone cold but trembling ever so slightly. Claire blinked, surprised. "Are you family?" The younger man exchanged a glance with the older woman before answering. "Not exactly. But we need to speak with you. It is about Mr. Hale, and what happens next." Claire's heart tightened, confusion and curiosity swirling together. The red leather folder caught her eye. Whatever was inside looked official, legal, heavy, and full of consequences. She looked back at Richard, lying helpless and unaware, and felt a familiar protective instinct rising in her chest. Something was happening here, something she was not prepared for, but suddenly responsible for. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Because whatever this was, whatever these strangers had come to reveal, she knew one thing for certain. Richard Hale, the man everyone thought had no one, was not as alone as they assumed. And whatever came next, she would stand by him. This was the beginning of a story that would change her life forever, in ways she never imagined. Claire held her breath for a moment as the 2 strangers stepped fully into the room, their presence shifting the air like a sudden change in temperature. She instinctively positioned herself closer to Richard's bedside, her protective instinct rising even though she did not fully understand why. The older woman, dressed in a tailored gray coat with polished silver buttons, moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. The younger man beside her looked equally polished, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression serious but not hostile. Claire's voice stayed steady as she asked, "What exactly is this about? Are you here to make medical decisions for him?" The younger man shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that. Mr. Hale made arrangements months ago. We were instructed to come when his condition reached a critical point." Claire's brows drew together, confusion mixing with caution. "Arrangements? What kind of arrangements?" The older woman glanced toward Richard's still face before answering. "He has no living family, but he has unfinished matters. Very important ones." She opened the red leather folder, but did not reveal the contents. "Before anything else, we need to know, how long has he been alone?" Claire swallowed, the truth weighing on her shoulders. "Since he arrived. He came in unconscious. No ID, no contacts. We tracked his name from hospital records, but no one came." The woman closed her eyes as if absorbing a blow. "He always did everything alone," she murmured, almost to herself. Claire felt a tug in her chest. She glanced at Richard again, wondering who he had been to these people. The man in the suit stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Miss Bennet, we need to ask something unusual. Has he spoken at all? Even a little?" Claire shook her head. "Not a full sentence. Just movements. I think he tried to say something earlier, but his body is too weak." The young man exchanged a tense look with the older woman, and for a moment Claire saw something fragile flicker in their expressions. Concern, urgency, maybe guilt. The woman placed the folder on the bedside table beside the heart monitor. "Miss Bennet, we cannot share everything yet. But please understand, Richard Hale was not an ordinary man." Claire's pulse quickened. The statement carried weight, as if loaded with secrets she had not expected. The woman continued, "If he wakes, he must be told something immediately. Something only a witness he trusts can deliver." Claire blinked. "Why me? I barely know him." The man answered gently, "Because you are the only person he has." Those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Claire looked at Richard, suddenly seeing him differently. Not just a fading patient, but a man who had lived an entire life unseen by those around him. Before she could ask more, a beeping sound interrupted them. Richard's heart monitor spiked sharply. Claire rushed forward, her training taking over. She checked his pulse, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "Richard, can you hear me? You are okay. Stay with me." His fingers twitched again, more deliberate this time. Claire leaned closer, her breath catching when she heard a faint whisper scraping past his dry lips. "Please do not let them." The words dissolved into the air, leaving Claire frozen. The two visitors stepped forward urgently. "What did he say?" Claire did not answer immediately. She was too focused on Richard's trembling hand, the fear in his weak whisper echoing through her mind. Something was wrong, something bigger than she had imagined. The older woman moved to the opposite side of the bed, her tone firm but not unkind. "Miss Bennet, whatever he said, you must not take it lightly. He trusted you with it." Claire stared at Richard's pale face, her pulse pounding. Trust. The word hit her harder than she expected. She had promised she would not let him face this alone, and now that promise seemed to carry weight she had never intended. The younger man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Miss Bennet, there is something you need to know about Mr. Hale. Before he became ill, he made arrangements that could change your life. But whether he wakes, and whether you can help him, may determine everything." Claire felt the world tilt under her feet. She looked again at the red leather folder, at the strangers whose eyes held urgency, and finally at Richard, whose frail hand still trembled beneath hers. Whatever story she had stepped into, it was no longer just about care or compassion. It was about truth, secrets, and a dying man's last plea. And Claire, whether ready or not, was now at the center of it. Claire stood frozen for a long moment, her hand still resting over Richard's frail fingers as the weight of everything pressed down on her. The quiet beeping of the monitor filled the room as she tried to steady her breathing. She looked up at the two strangers, their polished appearances now feeling strangely out of place in the dim, sterile hospital room. The older woman folded her hands calmly in front of her, but Claire noticed a subtle tremor in her posture, a crack in the otherwise flawless confidence she carried. The younger man had stepped back slightly, though his eyes never left Claire, watching her with a careful intensity. Claire finally found her voice. "What exactly are you trying to tell me? What arrangements? What does any of this have to do with me?" The older woman opened the red leather folder at last, revealing neatly organized documents, sealed envelopes, legal papers, and a handwritten letter addressed simply to C. Bennett. Claire's breath caught. Her name. She instinctively shook her head. There must be a mistake. I have only known him for 3 days. The woman nodded slowly. You have known him for 3 days, yes. But he has known of you for much longer. Claire's heart tightened. Nothing made sense, and the intensity of the moment made her feel as though the floor was shifting beneath her. How could he know me? She whispered, her voice thin. The younger man stepped forward slightly. Richard Hale was a very private man. He did not trust easily, but he observed the world closely. And in all his years of business and life, he admired people who lived with quiet integrity. People who gave kindness even when no one was watching. Claire blinked, stunned. That still does not explain why my name is in that folder. The older woman gently placed the folder on the bedside table. Mr. Hale followed your work at the community health clinic long before you ever transferred here. He saw how you treated every patient with dignity. He saw how you stayed after hours, how you used your own money to buy winter supplies for patients who had nowhere else to go. Claire's eyes widened. She had never told anyone about those things. She did them because they were right, not because she wanted recognition. How would he even know that? The woman sighed softly. Because Richard Hale spent the last years of his life trying to find someone who reminded him of the goodness he lost in his own life. Someone worthy of something he did not want to leave in the hands of people who never cared about him. The younger man nodded solemnly. He chose you, Miss Bennett. He chose you long before you met him. Claire felt her legs weaken. She gripped the edge of the bed for support. Chosen me for what? The woman did not answer right away. Instead, she looked at Richard's still body, her eyes softening. For the truth. For the responsibility he left behind. And possibly for everything he owned. Claire stared at her in disbelief. Everything he owned? Why me? I am just a nurse. The younger man shook his head firmly. No, Miss Bennett. You are the only person he trusted to receive what he left behind without greed, without deceit, without expectation. Claire's pulse was pounding in her ears. The room felt too small, too bright, too heavy with secrets. She looked at Richard again, the fragile rise and fall of his chest barely visible under the thin hospital blanket. This does not feel real, she whispered. I do not understand any of this. The older woman softened her tone. You do not need to understand everything today. What matters is that he trusted you. And if he wakes, he will tell you himself. As if summoned by her words, Richard's fingers twitched again. His eyelids fluttered weakly. Claire leaned in instinctively, her voice gentle. Richard? It is Claire. I am here. His lips parted, the faintest rasp of breath escaping. Please do not let them. The words drifted into silence again, but this time Claire felt their weight like a warning. The older woman stepped forward quickly. Miss Bennett, what did he say? You must tell us. Claire hesitated. Something deep inside her, something instinctual, told her to protect him. She straightened, her voice steady. He said he needs rest. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly at the half-truth, but Claire did not waver. She felt Richard's fragile hand in hers and knew, without fully understanding why, that whatever danger he feared was real, and that she, an ordinary nurse who lived quietly and gave quietly, had suddenly become the keeper of a dying man's last hope. As the strangers exchanged tense glances, Claire knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had just changed forever, and there was no turning back. Claire stood in the dim hospital room long after the two strangers had stepped out into the hallway, their silhouettes shrinking until the door clicked shut behind them. The quiet returned, settling over the space like a thick blanket. She still felt Richard's faint warmth through his hand, and she did not let go. Even as her mind raced in circles, she could not slow down. The red leather folder sat on the bedside table like a silent threat, its presence heavy with unanswered questions. She stared at it, her pulse quickening at the thought of opening it, yet something in her hesitated. She sensed that once she looked inside, her life would divide cleanly into two parts, before and after. She was not sure she was ready for after. For several long minutes, she listened to the steady beeping of the monitor, the fragile rise and fall of Richard's chest, the distant footsteps of nurses finishing their rounds. Her world felt suddenly too big and too small at the same time, as if the edges of her life had been pushed outward without warning, leaving her overwhelmed by possibilities she had never asked for. Eventually, She exhaled slowly and whispered, "Richard, what did you get me into?" His only reply was the weak flutter of his eyelids, the smallest sign of life. That was enough to ground her. She gently set his hand down and walked toward the hallway, tightening her ponytail and smoothing her scrubs as she stepped out. She found the two strangers waiting near the nurse's station, their postures stiff and uneasy. The fluorescent lights made their expressions sharper, revealing the strain beneath their polished exteriors. Claire approached them with cautious resolve. "All right," she said quietly. "I want answers, but I want them outside his room. He needs rest." The older woman nodded, and the young man gestured toward a small consultation room nearby. Claire followed them inside, closing the door behind her. Then she crossed her arms and faced them. "Start talking." The older woman drew a slow breath. "Miss Bennet, Mr. Hale is not just a wealthy man. He is one of the wealthiest in the country." Claire blinked, stunned. She had expected something unusual, but not this. The woman continued, choosing her words carefully. "He lived quietly, very quietly. Almost no one knew the extent of his fortune except his legal team and one or two trusted individuals." Claire shook her head. If he was that wealthy, why was he alone? Why did no one come for him? The younger man answered this time. "Because Mr. Hale cut ties with most of the people in his life years ago. People he once trusted exploited him, betrayed him, used him." Claire felt a painful twist in her chest. She looked back toward the closed door of the consultation room, imagining the frail man lying there. "So he shut everyone out," she whispered. "To survive," the young man said. "But that made him more alone than ever." The older woman opened the folders slightly, revealing a glimpse of legal seals. He wanted to leave his empire in the hands of someone who had never shown him greed. Someone who treated others with compassion. Someone he could trust with his legacy. Claire shook her head again, more firmly this time. "You cannot expect me to believe that a billionaire chose a nurse he barely met to inherit everything." The woman met her eyes steadily. "He chose you long before he met you. He observed your work because he was looking for someone who lived with the kind of integrity he lost. Someone who still believed in people." Claire felt emotions knot in her throat. Disbelief, fear, responsibility she was not prepared for. She stepped back slightly, pressing a hand to her forehead. "This is too much. I never asked for any of this." The woman softened her tone. "We know. That is exactly why he chose you." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. When she opened them, she realized the two strangers were watching her with a strange mix of hope and urgency, as if her decision mattered far more than she understood. Before she could respond, a nurse opened the consultation room door. "Claire," she said gently, "your patient is asking for you." Claire's heart lurched. "Richard," the nurse nodded. "He is awake." Claire rushed down the hall, her footsteps echoing loudly. She pushed open his door, breathless, and found him looking at her with weary eyes full of something raw and urgent. He lifted a trembling hand toward her. "Claire, please," she hurried to his side, leaning close. "I am here." "What is it?" He swallowed painfully, his voice barely a whisper. "Do not let them decide for me." Claire felt chills race down her spine. She tightened her grip on his hand, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I will not let anyone decide anything without you. I promise." His fingers curled weakly around hers, relief softening his features. For the first time, Claire felt something shift inside her, not fear, but resolve. She did not know what battle she was stepping into, but she knew this. Richard Hale would not face it alone, and neither would she. Claire stayed at Richard's bedside long after the other nurse had stepped out, her hand still wrapped around his frail fingers as she tried to process everything he had whispered. His eyes, though weak, held a clarity that had not been there before, as if desperation had forced his mind awake for one final stretch. She leaned closer, careful not to overwhelm him. "Richard, I need you to breathe slowly. You are safe right now. I am here." He blinked once in acknowledgement, his chest rising and falling with slow, labored breaths. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the steady beeping of the heart monitor, a reminder of how fragile everything had become for him. Finally, his lips parted again. "They want control," he rasped, the effort bringing a faint tremor to his jaw. Claire's brows knit with concern. Control of what? His gaze drifted toward the red leather folder on the bedside table, his eyes darkening with something like fear. Everything. My companies, my assets, my legacy. They cannot be trusted. Claire remained still, absorbing his words. Richard, the two people who came here said they work with you. They told me you trusted them. Richard shook his head weakly, a tiny but firm movement. Not them. Not anymore. A chill ran through her. She tried to keep her voice calm. Then who set up those documents? Who assigned them to come here? His breath caught, and for a moment she thought he might lose consciousness again. Then, with a visible effort, he rasped, I planned it months ago, before I knew who they really were. Claire's mind raced. So you once trusted them, but something changed. He gave a faint nod. They want more than I offered them. They think, if I die, they will take everything. Claire felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She was suddenly very aware of the closed door, the quiet hallway outside, the sterile silence of the hospital around them. Richard, she asked gently, why me? Why put my name on anything? Why trust someone you barely know? His fingers tightened around hers, weakly, but with unmistakable intent. Because you do not want anything from me. She felt her breath hitch. You do not know that. I do, he insisted softly. You see people, not money. You see pain, not opportunity. You stayed with me, even when you thought I was no one. Claire swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the raw sincerity in his voice. He closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. You are the only person who has ever looked at me as a human being and not as a wallet. She blinked rapidly as something warm and painful built behind her ribs. She wanted to argue, to deny the responsibility he was placing on her shoulders, but she could not. Not when he looked at her with such desperate trust. Richard, she whispered, what do you want me to do? His eyes opened again, their faded blue color reflecting the fluorescent lights above them. Protect my wishes. Do not let them twist my death into something ugly. Claire exhaled slowly. To do that, Richard, I need to know the truth. What is inside that folder? His gaze held her steadily. Everything. My wealth, my letters, my instructions. The life I built, and the life I want to leave behind. Before she could respond, the door opened quietly, and the older woman from earlier stepped inside. Her expression was calm, but her eyes flicked between Claire and Richard with an intensity that made the hairs at the back of Claire's neck rise. Mr. Hale, she said smoothly, it is good to see you awake. We have important matters to review. Richard's hand tightened around Claire's with sudden urgency. Claire rose instinctively, placing herself slightly in front of him without even thinking about it. He needs rest, she said firmly. The woman's polite smile did not reach her eyes. We do not have time to wait for rest. He must sign the necessary amendments immediately. Claire's heart pounded. She did not know the details, but she knew enough to recognize danger when it stood in front of her in polished heels. She lifted her chin. Whatever paperwork you brought, it will wait. He is not in any condition to sign anything. The woman's expression cooled. Miss Bennet, you are misunderstanding your place in this situation. Claire met her gaze unflinchingly. No, I understand it perfectly well. My place is to protect my patient. Richard exhaled with relief, his fingers loosening slightly around hers. The woman took a slow step forward. You are interfering in matters far beyond your authority. Claire's voice did not waver. Then, you can call security. But until then, you are not touching him, and you are not putting anything in front of him to sign. The woman stared at her in stony silence. Claire felt the battle lines form in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Whatever storm Richard feared, it was no longer distant. It was here, standing in front of them. And Claire, whether ready or not, was no longer just a nurse. She had just become Richard Hale's only line of defense. The tension in the room thickened, settling like a storm cloud ready to burst, but Claire did not flinch. The older woman held her stare for several long seconds before finally stepping back with a tight, forced smile. Very well, she said, her tone cool and sharp. We will give him a moment. But understand this, Miss Bennet. Delaying the signing of these amendments could jeopardize the stability of everything he has built. Claire did not move from her position beside Richard's bed. His health comes first. Nothing else. The woman's eyes hardened, but she turned and walked out, the younger man following behind her, though he hesitated at the door and cast one last conflicted glance toward Richard before leaving. When the door closed, Claire felt the breath rush out of her, her shoulders sagging for the first time since the confrontation began. She turned back to Richard, who looked utterly exhausted, his face pale and drawn. She pulled his blanket higher and brushed a trembling hand across her forehead. "Are you all right?" she whispered. Richard's eyes fluttered open, and he exhaled with effort. "You handled that better than I could." Claire smiled faintly, though her heart was racing. "I handled it because you are too weak to fight them yourself. But I need you to tell me something. I need to know who exactly those people are." Richard took a moment to gather enough strength to speak. "She was my financial advisor. Trusted her for years. He is her associate. Thought I could rely on them. But when I began making new plans, they wanted control." Claire sat down carefully in the chair beside him. "What kind of control?" His jaw tightened, revealing just how deeply the betrayal cut. "They want my companies, my investments, the entire estate. They think if I die, with the documents they prepared, they will have everything transferred before anyone questions it." Claire felt a chill crawl down her spine. "And the amendments she mentioned?" Richard's expression twisted into frustration. "She drafted changes that would give her authority over my holdings if I am declared mentally unfit or incapacitated. She wants my signature before I lose the strength to refuse." Claire could hardly breathe. "And you never intended to sign them?" "Never," he whispered. "I had my own documents prepared, my own plan, but I did not realize how far she would go." Claire looked at the red leather folder again. "Your real documents are in there?" He nodded weakly. "Everything." Claire swallowed hard. "Then we need to protect it. And we need to make sure no one forces you into anything." Richard's fingers twitched, and she squeezed them gently. "Claire," he murmured, "I am running out of time." She shook her head, refusing to accept the quiet resignation in his voice. "Do not say that. You are still here. We can still fix this." A faint smile touched his lips. "You still think you can fix the world?" "I can try," she said softly. He exhaled, a fragile sound that carried a lifetime of regret. "If anything happens to me, promise me you will deliver the letter addressed to you." Claire felt her breath hitch. "I promise. But nothing is happening to you today." Their quiet moment was shattered by a sudden loud knock on the door. Claire stiffened instantly. The door opened before she could answer, revealing the younger man, standing alone this time. His expression was less polished, more human, as if something inside him had cracked. "Miss Bennet," he said in a low voice, "I need to speak with you privately." Claire narrowed her eyes. If this is another attempt to pressure him, it is not, he cut in quickly. He stepped forward but kept a respectful distance. "Please, I need you to trust me for one moment." Richard's weak voice drifted across the room. "Be careful, Claire." She nodded, then stepped outside the room with the young man, leaving the door slightly open in case Richard called for her. In the hallway, he lowered his voice to a whisper. "You do not understand how dangerous this situation has become. She will not stop, not as long as she believes she is entitled to his estate, and she will find ways to force the signature before the night is over." Claire's heart pounded. "Why are you telling me this?" His voice cracked just slightly, revealing a guilt he could no longer hide. "Because I did not know how far she was willing to go. I did not know she planned to declare him incompetent tonight. And now, I cannot be part of this anymore." Claire stared at him, stunned. "Then help me protect him." He swallowed hard. "I will. But we do not have much time. If she files the paperwork, the hospital will legally have to comply." Claire felt her stomach drop. "So what do we do?" He glanced toward Richard's door, then back at her with urgency burning in his eyes. "The only thing that can stop her tonight is you." Claire felt something anchor inside her, a fierce, steady resolve that surprised even her. Whatever storm was coming, she was no longer facing it alone. And she was no longer just a nurse. She was about to become the one person capable of saving Richard Hale's future. Claire felt the pressure folding in on her from every direction as she stood in the quiet hallway with the young associate. The sterile hospital lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the floor, amplifying the intensity of the moment. She crossed her arms, gripping them tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. "If she is planning to declare him incompetent tonight," she said slowly, "what exactly can I do to stop her? I am just a nurse." The young man shook his head. "No, you are not. You are the only person he trusts, and the only one who has been with him long enough to see the truth." Claire frowned. "What truth?" He glanced around nervously before whispering, "That he is still lucid." Weak, yes, but aware. That alone can stop her from filing the emergency declaration. She needs the hospital's cooperation, and the hospital will not agree if you submit a formal statement that he is still capable of making his own decisions. Claire's heart pounded. A statement like that requires medical authority. I am not a physician. But you are the nurse of record, he countered quickly. Your documented observations matter. And if you request an immediate evaluation by the attending physician, she cannot override that process. Not tonight. Claire stared at him, her mind racing through medical protocols she had followed for years. He was right. A pending medical evaluation would put everything on hold. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. He hesitated, then lowered his gaze. Because I once believed in her. I thought she wanted to protect him, but I have seen the documents. She wants to dismantle everything he built. She wants his companies, his accounts, even his charitable foundations. She will burn his entire legacy to the ground if she gets control. Claire felt anger rise in her chest, sharp and cold. He worked his entire life for those things, she whispered. He does not deserve to have everything stolen from him when he is at his weakest. The young man nodded, guilt flickering in his eyes. I am sorry I did not speak up sooner. Claire drew in a long breath. All right, then we do this now. She stepped past him, marching toward Richard's room with renewed purpose. When she pushed open the door, she found Richard with his eyes half open, watching the doorway with a mix of fear and exhaustion. His breathing was shallow, but his mind was alert. Claire moved to his side immediately. Richard, listen to me, she said gently. I am going to request a cognitive evaluation from your attending physician. It will protect you from being declared incompetent tonight. Relief washed over his features, and he squeezed her hand weakly. Thank you, Claire. She shook her head. Do not thank me yet. We still have a long road ahead. She reached for the call button and paged the attending physician directly. A few moments later, Dr. Hayes entered the room, adjusting his glasses as he stepped inside. I received your page, Claire. What is the issue? She straightened her posture. Doctor, I need a full cognitive assessment from Mr. Hale. Immediately. Dr. Hayes looked surprised. Right now? It is late, and he has been unstable. He is lucid, Claire insisted firmly. He has been communicating clearly, and there are individuals attempting to push for an emergency incompetency declaration. I will not allow that without a proper evaluation. The doctor's eyes widened slightly as he understood the gravity of her words. He stepped closer to the bed and leaned down. Mr. Hale, can you hear me? Richard nodded faintly. Yes, doctor. Dr. Hayes began the assessment, asking simple questions. Name, date, location, basic memory prompts. Richard answered slowly but accurately, proving his awareness despite his physical weakness. When the doctor finished, he turned to Claire. He is fatigued, but he is oriented. I will file a notice that he is competent as of this evaluation. Claire felt a rush of relief, her shoulders sagging with the weight of what had almost happened. Thank you, doctor. Dr. Hayes nodded. I will update the chart immediately. Anyone attempting to alter his medical status without my authorization will be blocked. When he left the room, Claire finally exhaled. But the moment of ease did not last long. Richard looked at her with deep worry in his eyes. She will not stop, Claire. Claire sat back down beside him, her voice steady and full of quiet determination. Then neither will I. Not until you are safe. Richard's expression softened, and for the first time, something gentle flickered in his gaze. Trust, gratitude, and something deeper she could not name. Claire felt heat rise in her chest, but she pushed it aside. This was not the time. She glanced toward the red folder, its presence heavy with meaning. Tomorrow, she said softly, you are going to tell me everything. But for tonight, rest. I will stay right here. His eyelids drifted shut, but his hand tightened around hers, refusing to let go. And Claire, knowing just how much he had endured alone, stayed exactly where she was. Outside the room, the soft click of heels echoed down the hallway. The battle was far from over. But Claire Bennett was no longer afraid. She was ready. Morning sunlight crept slowly across the floor of Richard's hospital room, warming the pale walls and casting soft golden light over everything. But Claire had barely slept. She remained in the chair beside his bed, her fingers curled gently around his hand, keeping watch through every hour of the night. She had expected the female advisor to return, to make another attempt at forcing paperwork into the room, but the hallway had remained eerily quiet. Too quiet. Claire felt it in her chest the way one feels the pressure shift before a storm. Richard stirred as the sunlight reached his face, his eyelids fluttering open with effort. When he saw her still sitting there, his expression softened. "You stayed," he whispered. Claire nodded. "I told you I would not leave you alone." He gave a faint smile. Exhaustion still written across every feature. "I wish someone like you had been in my life sooner." Claire felt warmth rise in her cheeks, but she squeezed his hand gently. "We will talk about that later. Right now, you need to save your strength." She stood and checked his adjusting it carefully before reaching for the red leather folder. "Richard," she said quietly, "I think it is time you tell me what is inside this." He looked at the folder, fear and determination passing through his eyes. "Open it." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded once. Claire slowly broke the seal and opened the folder. Inside were documents neatly arranged, along with a handwritten letter with her name on it. She swallowed, but she focused first on the legal papers. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the documents. "This is your estate plan, your companies, your charitable foundations. Everything is here." And her voice caught as she reached a page that named her directly. "Richard," she whispered, "you appointed me as executor." He met her gaze steadily, though tears threatened to form in his tired eyes. "Because I trust you with my life, and with what remains of it." Claire felt her heartbeat quicken in her chest, her breath catching. She tried to process the enormity of what he was asking. "Richard, this is more than I have ever handled. I am not a businesswoman. I am just, you are the only one I trust," he said firmly, despite the weakness in his voice. "You are the only one who does what is right, not what is easy." She felt tears sting her own eyes now, but before she could speak, a sharp knock came at the door. Claire stiffened instantly. The older advisor stepped inside, her expression icy and unreadable. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said smoothly, ignoring Claire entirely. "I was informed you were stable enough to resume our discussion." Richard's jaw tightened. Claire moved to stand between them, her voice calm but unshakable. "Dr. Hayes filed his evaluation. Richard is competent, and his medical chart reflects that. You cannot proceed with any emergency declaration." A muscle in the woman's jaw twitched. "That was an unfortunate obstacle, Miss Bennett. But do not think this is over. His estate must be handled responsibly, and he cannot leave such matters in the hands of she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, in the hands of someone with no financial experience. Claire felt anger burn beneath her skin, but before she could respond, Richard spoke, his voice rough but steady. "It is my decision, not yours, and I have made my choice." The woman turned toward him slowly. "Richard, you are emotional. You are vulnerable. You are allowing sentiment to cloud your judgment." Claire felt the accusation like a blow, but Richard's gaze never wavered. "My judgment," he said sharply, "is the one legal authority here, unless I appoint someone else." The advisor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Do not make a mistake you cannot undo." Claire stepped closer to the bed, placing her hand protectively on Richard's shoulder. He already made his decision, and he is fully aware of what he is doing. The advisor locked eyes with Claire, a cold calculation flashing in her expression. "You," she said quietly, "have no idea what you are stepping into." Claire refused to look away. "Then enlighten me." The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. "His empire is worth billions. The responsibility could crush someone like you." Claire's pulse thudded, but she kept her shoulders square. "You assume I care about money. I care about him." For the first time, the advisor's composure cracked. Her eyes flickered with something. Anger, disbelief, perhaps even fear. Finally, she straightened. "We will revisit this later." She turned and left the room, her heels echoing down the hallway like distant thunder. Claire exhaled slowly, tension draining from her muscles. She sat beside Richard again, brushing a hand through her hair. "She is not giving up." "Neither are you," Richard whispered. Claire looked at him, her heart aching at the trust in his eyes. "No," she said softly, "I am not." She reached for the handwritten letter addressed to her and held it carefully, feeling the weight of everything that was coming. The storm had not passed. It had only begun. But Claire Bennett was no longer afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next for him. The following days unfolded like a tightening web, every hour bringing another subtle shift in tension as the advisor continued circling Richard's case from every angle. Claire felt the pressure constantly, like a weight resting on her chest, but she refused to let it break her. She worked every shift with unwavering focus, checking Richard's vitals, monitoring his medications, and documenting every instance of lucidity to ensure no one could question his competency again. Meanwhile, Richard's strength began returning in small but hopeful increments. He could sit up for short periods. He could hold a conversation without slipping into exhaustion, and he watched Claire with a quiet gratitude that softened the lines of pain etched across his face. One afternoon, as she helped him take a sip of water, he whispered, "You saved me." Claire shook her head gently. "You saved yourself. I just made sure no one stood in your way." He smiled faintly, the expression fragile but genuine. "You assume that is a small thing." She looked away, her heart tightening at the sincerity in his voice. But before she could respond, a knock echoed through the room. Claire turned, expecting another confrontation with the advisor, but instead the young associate entered alone. His expression was conflicted, but resolute. "Mr. Hale," he said gently, "I want to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner." Richard studied him for a moment. "Fear makes cowards of many," he murmured. "What matters is what you do next." The young man swallowed. "I have resigned from her firm, and I have filed a formal statement outlining her attempts to manipulate your estate." Claire's breath caught. "You did what?" He nodded. "It will trigger a full investigation. She cannot file anything now without risking her license." Relief washed through Claire like cool air after a storm. Richard closed his eyes briefly, as though absorbing the news. "Thank you," he said softly. "This will protect my foundation, my employees, my causes. All of it." The young man nodded, then glanced at Claire. "And someone should tell her that she underestimated the wrong nurse." Claire's cheeks warmed, but she managed a steady breath. When he left the room, Richard slowly reached for the letter she had not yet opened. "Claire," he whispered, "please read it now." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said firmly. "You deserve to know everything." With trembling hands, she broke the seal of the envelope and unfolded the handwritten pages. She expected instructions, perhaps legal clarifications, but instead she found a story, his story. He wrote of a lonely childhood, of a life spent building an empire that grew larger even as his personal world grew smaller. He wrote about betrayal from those closest to him, about losing the ability to trust, about the years spent searching for someone who still lived with kindness. And finally, he wrote about her. Claire felt tears build as she read his words aloud, her voice soft and shaking. "You reminded me of the goodness I thought the world had lost. If I do not survive this illness, I want you to continue what I began. But if I do survive, I hope you will allow me to become part of your life in whatever way you will permit." She lowered the letter, her vision blurred. Richard watched her, vulnerability etched into every tired line of his face. "I wrote that before I ever met you. Before I knew you would be even more extraordinary than I imagined." Claire's heart swelled, her breath catching as she reached for his hand. "Richard, you are not dying. Not on my watch." A soft laugh escaped him, weak but warm. "I believe you." Weeks passed, and Richard's health improved steadily. Physical therapy sessions helped him regain strength. The color returned to his cheeks. The advisor lost her license and faced legal consequences. A new team, honest, transparent, and loyal, was appointed to oversee his affairs until he fully recovered. Through all of it, Claire remained by his side, not because he asked but because she wanted to. One crisp morning, as she helped him take his first steps unaided, Richard turned to her with a look she had never seen before, full of gratitude, affection, and something deeper. "Claire," he said quietly, "I spent years living for things that did not matter. But you made me want to live for the right things again." Claire felt warmth bloom deep in her chest. "You are doing that yourself, Richard." He shook his head gently. "Then let me say this clearly. I want you in my life. Whatever pace, whatever way, whatever you choose. I want a future where I am not alone. A future where you are not carrying the weight of the world by yourself." Claire felt her throat tighten as she whispered, "I would like that future too." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, their fingers intertwining with a kind of quiet certainty. The man who once feared the world now found courage in her presence. The woman who once thought she was just a nurse now realized she had changed. life far beyond what she ever imagined. Together, they stepped into the hallway, the sunlight painting their silhouettes in warm gold. For the first time in a very long time, Richard Hale walked toward the future not as a lonely billionaire, but as a man who had finally found someone who saw his humanity before his wealth. And Claire Bennett walked beside him, knowing that choosing kindness had led her to a story she never expected, one built not on fortune, but on trust, healing, and the quiet beginning of love.